Hi, and welcome back to the Power BI Custom Visuals course, and in this module we're going to be covering the route map. Now the route map is a very interesting way to visualize objects moving around on a map. It allows you to actually look at the trajectory of an object using the latitude and longitude of an object, say for example a taxi, or maybe you want to analyze a vessel moving in the ocean, or maybe a hurricane, or even an airplane going across the sky. If you want to be able to analyze that information, if you have latitude and longitude, then you're able to visualize the trajectory of an object easily on the route map. Now the route map requires really three main core objects. You need a latitude and longitude, like I mentioned, and you also need some kind of a timestamp. Now you'll see here in the slide I say that you need time, but it actually doesn't have to be a date time. It doesn't have to be a time value. It could even be a numeric value of some kind. The main purpose of that timestamp is to be able to analyze the direction and the movement where the object is going, where it's coming from and where it's going. So really the time, or the timestamp, gives you the order of operations of how to be able to sort each of the latitude and longitude. So it knows the direction of the object, the trajectory of the object, and which way it's going. So that's why the timestamp is important. But again, it does not necessarily have to be a time value. It can also be something like a number. All right, the other things that are useful inside the route map is you can also have things like other attributes that you want to visualize. So you can see in the map on the right-hand side, this is actually a map displaying different taxis and the movement of these taxis. But you can also have things like color or width or the style of the line that can be changed based on other attributes that you have. So for example, you can see that the color of the lines change in these, and that's because this is a taxi indicator that has when a taxi is moving, and then you can see when it picks up a passenger, the line changes to that purple color. So you can actually see where it's traveling around without a passenger and when it's traveling around with a passenger, and you can be able to analyze those values and see those values. You can also change the width of the line, so you can see the width of the line here in this example is different as well. So you can see the one on the left-hand side is a little bit wider than the one on the right-hand side. And you can also change the style of the line as well. So you can see one of the lines is kind of using this dashed or dotted line effect, whereas the other one is a solid line. The default there is a solid line, but you can optionally change the style to be that dashed or dotted line. That's all done with the different attributes that you have inside of your data set. So the different data set attributes that you have will help you analyze and be able to visualize your map in different ways. All right, you can see who published this one. Let's go ahead and take a look at where you need to go next to be able to download and use this route map custom visual. All right, so our first stop is going to be at the Office store. So if you go with me here to store.office.com, that will take you and redirect you to the site that I'm at right now. We're going to start by going and searching through the Power BI product. And through the Power BI product, you'll find all the custom visuals that are available here. And to make this a little easier for ourselves, let's go ahead and search for the route map here. So if we type out route map in the search bar, we should be able to find it rather quickly here. I'll go ahead and select the route map. And then I'll select, you can, by the way, see the description, who made it, when it was released, that sort of things down here. But let's go ahead and click on Add to go ahead and find where you can download the route map. So you'll want to download the route map, store it in some location that you can easily find later. And then you can also download a sample. So if you want a sample, this is actually the same screenshot that I had in my PowerPoint slides a few moments ago. If you want to see that example of the taxi data, you can use this download the sample report option here to be able to download a pre-built example using the route map. So it gives you a good idea of how you might be able to use it with your data because you can see how someone else already did it. So again, you'll want to download the route map right here. If you want the sample, you'll go to the right-hand side. Once you have this downloaded, you'll go over to the Power BI desktop and you're ready to follow the rest of our example. Now, through the rest of the example, I want to give you a little context of the data that we're working with. We are going to be looking at vessel data, and really, to be more specific, we're going to be looking at different cruise ships that are in the ocean. I've collected some data that's from a website. It's not live data because I have it stored in an Excel spreadsheet, but it's going to be multiple, I think it's 7 different cruise vessels that I have from different cruise liners that I want to be able to analyze and see where they're at in their movement. And I want to be able to see that visualized on a map very clearly. Now, this data is going to be static. It's a little bit older, but just note that you can also have this be live. If you actually bought into an API, for example, from some of the websites that track this information, you would be able to stream that data live into Power BI through a couple different methods, but you can certainly do it through the Power BI desktop, but you can also do it directly in the Power BI service. All right, so for us, though, we're going to be pulling in data from an Excel spreadsheet, so I'm going to go up to the Get Data section here and select Excel. We're going to go find the data source that we're using for this example, which is going to be under my data section here. It's called Vessel Tracking, and we'll hit Open. And we'll see, and we'll get a good idea of what this data looks like here. Once it pulls this in, we'll select the Tracking Data spreadsheet. And we can see that in this case, my timestamp is a time. Again, just to remind you, it does not have to be a time, but this is what's going to be used to tell the order of each of these events that we have. So we have the time, we have an actual event name, we have some details of the event. We can scroll over a little bit more. We'll see things like the latitude and longitude. Those are also mandatory to have here. You'll also have things like the destination where the cruise ship was going, some additional information like their speed, and we can also get in things like the vessel name. So we have the vessel name here that we can see. I've pulled in multiple different cruise lines here, Royal Caribbean, Carnival. I grabbed a couple, Princess as well. All right, so I'll hit load to bring this data now into the Power BI desktop. And we'll give that a few moments to load in, and once it does, we'll then start to bring in some of this information on our report. Now, the way I will get started with this is rather than just jumping into the route map, I'm actually going to bring in a slicer that we can use as a filter here. So I'll go ahead and select the slicer, move that up in the top right here so it's a little bit out of the way. And we're going to bring in the vessels to be able to filter here. The whole idea here is that we want to be able to filter down the vessels so that we can find the one that we care about easily when it comes to looking at our report here in a few moments. Now, I would also recommend here, you can see the slicer has rather small text. If you want to increase the text size here, you can go underneath the Format Paintbrush, underneath Items, and I can bump up that text size just a little bit so it's a little easier to see. Okay, perfect. The next thing that I want to do here is I'm going to bring in the route map. Now, right now, the route map is not visible here. Again, it's a custom visual that you need to import by selecting the Import from File option right here. We'll select Import a custom visual again, and we'll select Import once more. All right, now we'll go find wherever we downloaded the custom visual that I showed you earlier. We'll select the route map. That's the custom visual, the PBI viz file, and we'll hit open. That'll now import the custom visual into the visualization section here, and we can bring that into our design surface and make this a little bit larger so we can actually work with it. All right, so we got a couple things that we can do here now. You'll see the field list that you have in the route map. You have things like a timestamp, the latitude, longitude, segment. We'll talk about some of these other ones as we get going. But really, the first three are the mandatory ones if you really want to be able to visualize something here. You'll bring in the timestamp, so I'll go ahead and select time. And then, of course, you'll need to bring in the latitude and longitude, so I'll select both of those. Now, the first thing you'll notice about this is it makes it one entirely large line. And basically what it's doing is it's connecting every one of the data points that we have, every one of the latitude and longitude points together based on the time. And that's why you see it kind of zigzag back and forth, because a lot of these are happening during intermediate times, right, at the same time. So one, basically it thinks that a ship is moving here, then moves way over there, then moves over back over here. So it's getting a little bit confused on it. And the reason why that's the case is because we haven't really defined what kind of segmentation we want to do on the data. So that's why we're getting one big line that goes back and forth. Now, if you wanted to, you can actually add some segmentation to this, and we really should in this case. You can add some segmentation to this if you actually look over to the segment section. If we were to drop something like the vessel underneath segment, notice how it changes immediately. You can see all the same data points, but those data points now are for one particular vessel, and you can see the path for that particular vessel here. So we can see whether we're looking over in Europe or if we're looking over in the Caribbean here. We can see quite a bit as far as the different types of vessels and their movement. You can see even ones that didn't move a lot. There's some here that didn't have much movement at all, but we can see where they did move the little bit that they did. All right, so pretty interesting stuff here. And you can also, by the way, you can use the slicer, so I can do things like kind of toggle back and forth between the different vessels that we have and see their movement. I'm going to leave it on this one for a moment, just so we have one that we can use as an example here. So this is a Carnival Splendor that we're going to use this for the rest of our examples. Now, as we select the map again, you'll notice that there are several other fields that we can pass in. They're optional. You don't have to use them. But these fields are what actually control, if you remember back from the slides, the color, the width, and the style of the line. It's called dashed legend here, but it's kind of the style of the line. So, for example, if we wanted to change the color of the line based on a type of an event that occurred, then we can drop the event into the color legend, and then we can actually adjust underneath the Format Paintbrush, which I'll show you in a few moments, the event, or the color, I should say, of the line. And that's just for the segment of the line that's based on that event. So you could have one line that's multiple colors, as you might remember from the screenshot in my PowerPoint earlier. All right, now we can also do the same thing with width and the line style. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop in the event into both of those, just so I can give you an example of how this works. We won't necessarily use all three of these, but I'm going to drop that in here so you can see what it looks like when we go to the format section. You can also actually use and create tooltips. The tooltip would appear whenever you hover above one of the indicators. You can see a very small little indicator here, that little dot that's actually an arrow. If you hover above that, you would normally see a tooltip. Right now we don't have anything in the tooltip section, so we should probably drop a few things in the tooltip section, like the vessel name, maybe where it's going, the destination, maybe some details that were logged, and let's also bring in the event itself. So I've dropped a few things here underneath the tooltip section. Now whenever I hover above a area here, you can see all this information is returned back from our data set. So the name of the vessel, where it's going, the details, and the event that was logged here, the change sea area. So it's pretty interesting that you're able to do these things. Now you'll notice here, I'm going to point out that it says first vessel, first destination, first details, first event. The reason it has first prefix before it is because usually what you drop into a tooltip is some kind of an aggregate value. So some kind of a value that can be summed up or aggregated in some way. Or maybe it's already been aggregated through a calculation. In this case, because we actually dropped text in here, it's returning back the very first value it found. Which in this case is fine because we only have one value for each of the indicators that are on the map. So every indicator is displayed on the map. So the fact that it's using first here doesn't really impact it at all. I have, however, done a previous video that shows you how to handle a scenario where you have more than one value that you want to display on a tooltip. So, for example, if I didn't want to show the first vessel, I wanted to show all the vessels. If there were multiple vessels here, you could actually create, using DAX, a nice comma-separated list of all the destinations or the events that occurred inside of that one data point. Again, in this case, it doesn't matter because you're seeing here whenever we hover above that data point, there's only really one value for each data point on the map anyways. Okay? All right, so that's the tooltip area. Now, let's move over now to the Format Paintbrush section. So we'll go over to the Format section here, and we'll kind of talk through the available options that we have here, starting off with the Legend section. The Legend section may or may not be something you'll use, so let's go ahead and turn it on and talk about it. You'll notice when you turn it on, it gives you a little empty area up top, and that's because you have this legend that you can actually create on your own. This legend basically tells you what the description is of the color, the width, and the dash line here. You can give it some kind of description. And you'll notice what it's showing here is actually a comma-separated list of all of the events. So if I wanted to, I could actually come in here and name this, and it would actually provide a name for the color attribute that we have here. So I can do something like come up here, or maybe underneath the dash section, and I can type out event, and that just provides a label for what the color is. So we're seeing in the color the name of the event or the type of the event. That's optional. If you don't want to use this, you don't. Basically, you're just labeling the different indicators or the different attributes that you use on the map. You can increase the text size of that if you wanted to, so I can bump that up. You can change the position to the bottom if you wanted to. That's also available there. I'm going to turn the legend off. It's not really necessary for what I'm doing, so I'm going to go ahead and hit that off. Next, you'll have the color section. So underneath the color section, you can change the color that's used for all of the events. So I can kind of go underneath the default section here and change the color for every single line that I have. Or I can actually make it data-driven. So you can see that there is actually a section here below where you can specify the color that you want to use for each event that occurs. Now, the events are actually, the reason why it's set to the event is because I made it that way. If I go underneath the field list here, you can see underneath the color legend, I dropped the event in here. And so based on me dropping the event column in here, everything that I see underneath the specify section are different events that I can change the color for. So for example, if I wanted to change this detected in C to something else, I can select the option here underneath specify and make this one red. And you'll see when I do that, it makes that line red. You can do that for any of the other ones here as well. But for the time being, I'm going to go ahead and hit revert to default. All right, so that's the color. Let's go ahead and move down a little bit farther here. And let's talk about the width. So if we want to change the width, that's pretty similar. You can go underneath the width section here. You can change the default width of all of the lines. So if I wanted all the lines to just be 5 points, then I can change it to 5, and you can see it's increased that for all of them, no matter which one I switch to, they're all increased now. You can also, if you wanted to, let me flip back over to the map. You can also, if you wanted to now, come over to a specific type of line. So if I wanted a specific type of line, like this detected at sea, to be 10 points, then I can bump that one specific line up here. Okay, and I didn't have to just be that one. I could have chosen any of these and made them 10-point font if I wanted to. And that kind of increased what I had over here. If I hit revert to default, that'll send it back to how it was. Let's go ahead and make all of them 5 points though. All right, so I've got that set. Let's go down to dashes. Underneath dashes, or the line style here, you can change the default line style to a dash one if you wanted to. So you can kind of see the different dash options that you have. That's dash type 1, that's 2, that's 3, and that's 4. So it gives you kind of different line kind of indicators if you wanted to. So you can kind of go back and forth, and you can see all of them are done in that way. Or if you wanted to, you could also make the specific types of events impact that. So if I go back down to dashes and maybe I change the default back to solid, I can say, well, I want the detected at sea to be dash line 4, dash type 4. And maybe I want the status one here to be dash type 1. So you can kind of change these just based on your preference to be specific to the type of event that you have selected. All right, so I'll revert this back to the default again. So I have a solid line. All right, so let's work our way now down to the arrows section. So down underneath the arrows section, this is where you have some capabilities to adjust the arrows that you see on the map. You can see there's little arrows here throughout the map, and you can actually adjust that down here underneath the arrows section. So underneath the arrows section, you can do things like maybe I want to have a starting point. And so you can see the starting point is up here. If I turn that on, you'll notice it gives me a little dot indicator there where it should have started. You can also make the ending point a little bit of a more bold arrow here. You can see when I turn that on or off, it makes it a little bit more of a bold arrow. And if you wanted to, you can turn off the middle arrow so it just looks like kind of a straight line going here. And that way, as you go back and forth between the different cruise lines here, you can see it more as a straight line as opposed to one, or a more smooth line as opposed to one that has the arrows in the middle of them. Okay, so that's pretty interesting as well. Let's go back over here again. Let's actually put the middle ones back on again so we can see the middle indicators, because the next set of these settings actually has to do with that. So for example, if I wanted to, I can change the number of those little middle arrows that I see. And that's done by using and changing the interval option here. Right now, with the interval of 1, it means it's going to show every single one item that I have inside of my data set. So every indicator that I have is going to be displayed based on every row I have in my data set. But if I had so many rows in my data set that it's just creating so many of these little arrows and I wanted to lower that, you can up the interval here. If I change it to 2, for example, you'll notice the number of arrows I see decreases. And that's just based on a little algorithm here that allows you to kind of lower the amount of arrows that you're showing, makes it a little simpler so that you can have maybe a little smoother view if you wanted to. And maybe if you just had, hundreds of data points for this one cruise ship, then it may be just too much. And so you can change the interval here so it doesn't overwhelm you with arrows on the screen. I want to change it back to 1 because it's not really that many arrows to begin with in this example. The next one you see here is scale. Scale has to do with the size of those arrows. So if I wanted to, I could bump that up to 2, and it gives it a little bit more of a bolder look. The arrows are a little bit larger there. You can also specify here. So let me unfilter here for a moment. I'm going to unfilter this. And if I go back and select the settings here again, underneath the bottom section here, you can specify the settings per cruise ship. So for example here, I can say that I don't want to see the arrows on the Royal Caribbean ship here. And so you can see it's just made it a plain line now. It's taken off the beginning and end and middle points, and it's just made it a basic line here. So you have some capabilities here, as I turn these on and off, to specify just for a specific cruise ship how I want to be able to visualize this, okay? All right, cool. So let me go back over to that again. I'll select Splendor again once more, just that's the one we've been using. And that's really it for the arrow section. Let's go down to the last section here, which is the advanced section, and we'll talk about what's available here. Underneath the advanced section, this has a lot to do, at least the first 3 settings, has a lot to do with how your end users are going to interact with this. So you might have noticed that I can do things like zoom in and zoom out of the map. If, as we saw the full view of this before, if I unselect this, I can zoom into certain areas if I wanted to. I can pan back and forth. So you have the ability to kind of move back and forth in here. But if you don't want your users to do that, what you can do is you can actually turn off that capability. So let me reset my filter here. If I wanted to, what I can do on that setting in the advanced section is I can turn off zoom. So I can no longer use my mouse to zoom in and zoom out with the mouse wheel. I can turn off pan, so I can't move back and forth now, so I can't grab this and move back and forth. And I can also turn off autofit. What autofit does, here's what autofit does. Whenever I select a value here, it autofits or zooms in just to that one particular value. That's what autofit does for me. If I turn off autofit, let's go turn that off for a moment, it'll actually allow me to unselect values, but it's not going to autofit into that particular area of the map. So that's what autofit does for you here, is it'll zoom in on one particular area and not, in this case, with it off, it looks at the full view of the map without zooming in, okay? So a lot of those features are actually nice to have, but if you want to turn off some of those capabilities for your end users, you can certainly do that here underneath the advanced section. I'm going to turn it all back on, and I'm going to select one again here so we can zoom back in on one. All right. The last couple settings here have to do with your geographical settings, and so you can see one's called Ignore Invalids, one's called Ignore Zero, or ignore zeros, and basically this has to do with the latitude and longitude values that you get, the geo coordinates that you get in your data set. So for example, if I have a geo coordinate or a latitude longitude that's just not a valid one, then it's going to ignore those rows. So it'll ignore those values on the map. Or if I have zeros, so if I have 0 values in here, which is actually, this feature is turned on right now, if I have zeros in as a latitude or longitude, it's going to ignore those values as well. So you can turn off that capability if you wanted to. If you wanted to be able to view the zeros or view the invalids, you can attempt to do that here, but just note that it could very drastically distort your map. All right, so that's really it for this one. It's an interesting visual, has a lot of cool things you can do. We talked about that you can change the colors, you can change the width of the line, and it's all based on the different attributes that you have in your data set. So the more interesting data you can pass in, the more interesting you can make your visual. Hope you guys enjoyed this one. This was a fun visual for me as well. And I look forward to showing you our next custom visual in our next video. Thanks a lot.